High blood pressure is a silent killer that's easy to ignore until it's too late. Over time, it damages the insides of our blood vessels, spiking our risk of heart attacks and strokes. But there are powerful, simple ways that we can dramatically lower our blood pressure and slash our risks. The best part is that we can do it all naturally, without having to take medications. So in this video, I'll show you 4 potent ways to naturally lower our blood pressure, along with the studies to prove their effectiveness. And if you want weekly health research summaries and strategies that I share with my patients, click the link in the video description below to sign up. So we need to start with our diet. You probably expected that, but aspects of our diet I'm going to cover here aren't what you'll usually hear about. There are 4 changes that you can make, and none of them are hard, that together can make a huge impact. The first one has to do with a macronutrient. An intriguing cohort study in England examined its impact on blood pressure. Researchers looked at a group of adults over a period of 11 years. They looked at how much of this macronutrient people ate and whether it was linked to getting high blood pressure. And what's the macronutrient? Protein. And here's what they discovered. Higher intakes of protein were associated with lower blood pressure, and they were also associated with a much lower risk of developing high blood pressure. It was cut by 40%. And that raises a natural question. Does the source of protein matter? In other words, do both animal and plant sources of protein reduce blood pressure, and do they do it by the same amount? Well, in this study, they found that both animal and plant proteins lowered blood pressure by about the same. However, their analysis showed that the risk reduction for high blood pressure was greater for plant proteins. It was 49% compared to 32% for animal proteins. So does that mean that we should only consume plant sources of protein? Well, there are 2 reasons to not jump to this conclusion. The first comes from another large study in China. They examined how different types of proteins were associated with the risks of developing high blood pressure. The results showed that the more types of protein people ate, the lower the risk, so there seems to be a benefit from increased diversity within our diets. The second is that animal sources of protein are especially high in an amino acid called leucine. This amino acid is critical for muscle building and maintenance, so why does that matter? Well, our muscles tend to degrade as we age, but there's growing evidence that a decline in muscle quality increases the risk of high blood pressure. So animal protein can help play a role in helping us maintain our muscle quality. But I do want to add a caution here. There are some sources of protein that we want to avoid, like processed and fatty cuts of meat that are high in saturated fats. These raise our blood cholesterol levels and aren't great for our cardiovascular health. There's one other benefit that we do get from protein, but I'll return to that a little later in the video. So what we can conclude so far is this. We do want to get plenty of protein, and consuming a variety of plant and animal sources, such as fish, looks like the best approach for our blood pressure. The second change in our diet that has a big impact on blood pressure is surprisingly simple. We need to get enough of a specific mineral. It's found in leafy greens, fruits, and vegetables. For instance, spinach, bananas, dried fruits, and broccoli are all excellent sources. Some fish, such as salmon, are great sources as well, but most of us aren't getting enough of this critical mineral, and that mineral is potassium. And here's what the research shows. A meta-analysis examined the results of 22 randomized controlled trials. Those researchers found that increasing potassium intake reduced systolic blood pressure by 3.5 units on average. Systolic blood pressure is the higher number that you'll see when you get your blood pressure measured. And look what happened when the potassium intake reached 3,500 to 4,700 milligrams. The reduction in blood pressure is an amazing 7 units. So we have strong evidence that potassium is connected to blood pressure. The impact it makes is significant, and that's the reason why I included it in microvitamin. But just because I take a supplement does in no way mean that you should as well. But just to clarify, my first priority when it comes to potassium intake is getting enough potassium-rich foods from my diet. And by doing that, there's another amazing benefit that we'll look at later in the video. The third dietary change to lower blood pressure involves increasing our intake of another substance. When we eat more of it, it acts in several ways to help regulate blood pressure. For instance, when bacteria in the gut ferment the substance, the process releases chemicals that relaxes the walls of our blood vessels, helping to lower our blood pressure. It also seems to help increase the good bacteria in our digestive system, which has multiple health impacts. What is this substance? It's fiber, and fiber comes in 2 forms. Soluble fiber, which can dissolve in water, and it has many health benefits, like binding to sugar to reduce its absorption. Insoluble fiber, on the other hand, passes through our digestive system mostly intact. It adds bulk to our stool and helps to move food more efficiently. So what about its impact on blood pressure? Well, there was a recent meta-analysis that brought together evidence from studies done around the world. It found a clear positive impact of increased fiber intake on blood pressure levels. Another meta-analysis tried to quantify the impact. It found that increasing fiber intake could lower blood pressure by around 4 units in adults with high blood pressure. And here's where we come to the extra benefit of eating potassium-rich foods like leafy greens, fruits, and vegetables. These are also fantastic sources of fiber. So increasing our consumption of these kills 2 birds with 1 stone. We increase potassium and fiber at the same time. The fourth and final dietary change to reduce blood pressure is the simplest of them all. Unlike the first 3, this isn't something that we need to add to our diets. Rather, it's something that we need to reduce, and that is salt. But how much salt is too much? Well, the body does need some sodium, which is contained in salt, but it doesn't need very much. The American Heart Association recommends that we should have no more than about half a teaspoon, or 1,500 milligrams per day. Compare that with the 3,500 milligrams that the average American eats daily. So how significant is sodium intake on our blood pressure? Well, one study looked at 85 different trials and it found a clear pattern. As sodium intake goes up, so too does blood pressure. And the reason is simple. Sodium causes our body to retain more water, increasing the volume of our blood. If there's a greater amount of fluid in our blood vessels, it makes sense that the pressure would increase. It's similar to the way that a balloon stretches tighter and tighter as you blow more air into it. Each of these 4 dietary changes have massive impacts. So what does it look like if we bring them all together? Well, scientists have developed a specific diet called the DASH diet, and that stands for Dietary Approach to Stop Hypertension. It's designed to incorporate all of these changes. It makes it easy to follow a pattern of eating that's got strong evidence of effectiveness for lowering our blood pressure. In fact, a meta-analysis concluded that the DASH diet appears to be the most effective way to lower our blood pressure without using medications. On average, adherence to that diet lowered blood pressure by about 7 units. So what is the DASH diet? Well, it's quite simple. Choose vegetables, fruits, low-fat dairy, whole grains, chicken, fish, and nuts while minimizing our consumption of sweets, sugary drinks, and red meat. But the DASH diet is just one option. It's not the only one. So in my clinic, I encourage patients to keep things simple and be guided by the 4 things that we've discussed. So get plenty of protein from a variety of sources, emphasizing plant-based proteins and avoiding fatty cuts of meat. Choose potassium-rich foods like leafy greens, fruits, and vegetables. But there is a caveat to this. If you've got irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease, adding more fiber to your diet might not be the best option. So again, we go through all of this in my clinic. The final strategy is to keep our salt intake low. After we've got our diet in shape, the next factor that can significantly lower our blood pressure is exercise. But there's one specific exercise that research has shown to be especially powerful. The connection between exercise and blood pressure has been clear for decades, but we want to make sure that we're getting the maximum benefit. So here's the question. Are there some kinds of exercise that are better than others when it comes to blood pressure? Well, researchers decided to find out. They published the results in a meta-analysis in 2023. In their investigation, they divided exercise into 5 types. The first is aerobic. This would include activities like running, jogging, and cycling. The second is dynamic resistance. This would be things like squats, push-ups, and lifting weights. The third is isometric exercise. This is when our muscles are tensed, but we aren't moving. The plank is a popular example of this type of exercise. The fourth type combines aerobic and dynamic exercise. And finally, the 5th type that they examined was high-intensity interval training, or HIIT. After careful statistical analysis, they were able to rank the different exercises in terms of how much they reduced blood pressure. They found HIIT to have the weakest effect and isometric exercise, like the plank, to have the strongest. Notice the bars for each exercise type. That represents the range of results seen in individual trials. The red dot shows us the average reduction. So we can see that HIIT, aerobic, and dynamic resistance training are all fairly similar. Some of the results for isometric exercise, however, are dramatically more powerful. And here's where it gets really interesting. The researchers divided the main type of exercise into subgroups. This gives us a finer-grained view of the effects of different exercise types. When we look for the most effective subgroup of exercise, it turns out to be, drumroll, wall squats. But even though wall squats had the greatest effect, the study shows us that each of these main types of exercise can significantly lower our blood pressure, which is great news when we factor in exercise snacks. More on that shortly. Now, we all have different preferences for the kinds of exercise that we find easier and more enjoyable to do. Some of us don't like jogging, but may enjoy lifting weights. For others, it's the opposite, and the research shows us that we can lower our blood pressure no matter what kind of exercise we do, even if it's just walking. When the researchers looked at exercise subgroups, they found that walking reduced blood pressure by an average of 2 units. The lesson here is that any type of physical activity is going to benefit our health and it's always worth doing. But I want to return to the exercise that the study found to be the most effective, which was wall squats. If we're looking for the greatest impact on our blood pressure in the least amount of time, this may well be it. Especially when we don't need special equipment and we can do this at home or at work as an exercise snack. So exercise snacks are short bursts of physical activity that you can sprinkle throughout your day. It's like a mini workout instead of doing one long training session. So instead of carving out a 30-minute chunk of time to hit the gym, you might do a few sets of wall squats between meetings, for example. But I want to emphasize again that all types of exercise are helpful and any movement that we can do or add to our lifestyle is a plus. And one of the other things that we can do to naturally lower our blood pressure is get better sleep. And we do have strong evidence for this. The Cardia Sleep Study checked blood pressure at the beginning of their study and then again after 5 years. They also periodically measured sleep quality of the study participants. They found people who slept less and had trouble staying asleep had higher blood pressure. Their blood pressure also went up over the study period. So what's the connection here? What seems to be happening is that if we don't get enough sleep, our body goes into a more stressed state. This happens because lack of sleep activates part of the nervous system that controls our fight or flight response. When the system is constantly activated, it can make our heart work harder and cause our blood pressure to rise. And there are 2 common things that people often get wrong when it comes to their sleep. The first is that they don't get up at the same time every day. So at the clinic, I always tell my patients, even on weekends, to get up at the same time and make sure that they get plenty of early morning sunlight. The other thing that people often get wrong when it comes to their sleep is that they get their caffeine intake wrong. So I make sure to get my caffeine intake within 4 to 5 hours of waking up. Then I don't have anything else. I don't have any more coffee or any more tea. Because caffeine, it lasts in the body for a really long time, and we want to make sure that that's all gone out of our system by the time that we want to fall asleep at night. And the final point that I want to go through in this video that people often get wrong about their sleep is that they have a large late dinner that is not great for our health. We have multiple studies now showing that eating dinner late at night is connected to taking longer to fall asleep. So I often encourage my patients to have an early, light dinner and then wait 30 minutes and then brush their teeth. That is a powerful signal that the calorie intake for the day has completed. That's also a great way to incorporate some fasting in the day. Overall, we've looked at 3 natural ways to lower our blood pressure: diet, exercise, and sleep. But there's a fundamental question that we haven't talked about in this video. What should our target be when it comes to blood pressure? What's a healthy level? Well, in this next video here, I explain how the thinking on this topic has recently changed. I'll also tell you what the latest research points to as to the ideal level that we should try and stay below.